So my name is Paul To. I'm Director of SDN and Virtualization. I'm responsible for solution strategy and go-to-market strategy. I get with you. So we have about 35 to 45 minutes to cover this virtualization topic. And what we're going to do is, from an agenda perspective, I'm going to talk a little bit about the challenges and opportunities for testing virtual. And all this talk about SDN, NFV, and it's presenting some interesting challenges, but also we feel that it's very interesting inflection points for us to get into some new spaces, for us to offer some new additional values to the users who are adapting these technologies. So we talk about kind of the new role of testing and assurance in this new world of virtualization. We're going to some specific use cases, and then as Angus talk about, sometimes when people relate, talk about Spirent, we think of those big, God boxes that cost, hundreds and thousands of dollars. But we also have a bunch of very enterprise-friendly delivery models. So we can talk a little bit about that. And also we'll talk a little bit about some of the stuff that we're doing with customers and with standard bodies in terms of pushing the envelope and pushing for the future. So how many of you favorite subject is to explain what the heck is SDN and NFV and what's the scope here? Are you tired of all this confusion and having people sort out? Like, we constantly get called into meetings. I was in a meeting that I was called and fly actually 3 hours to a meeting to talk about SDN, and then the subject of open folding even come up, right? And then we get called into NFV meetings, and then it turned out that it was all data center virtualization stuff, right? So it's just massive confusion out there. And any of you know Chris Swan? So if you know him, can you thank him for me, or if he's on the webcast, that this is the one graphic that I found, this Google image, and he put this graphic up there, and I thought it was actually pretty good. But then the problem is, depending on who we talk to, right, that the shape of the rectangles and square actually change. So just do a little bit of kind of a level set. Is now, by the way, for you techies, this is not a deployment architecture. This is merely kind of my way to laying out the landscape in terms of the technologies and the vendors and the customers that we're dealing with, right? And I found this picture very helpful in terms of setting, level setting for conversation. So at the top level, right, we have all the VM stuff, right, all the virtualization stuff, right, and it's very mature, and people are creating and spawning and live moving VMs in a matter of seconds and minutes. And I heard some talk about vSAN right now. There's talk about software-defined storage, and same thing happening in the storage space. And then a couple of years ago with OpenFlow, Open Networking Foundation, I think they did a good job to kind of solve that problem, right? Where the virtualization, the VM guys are saying, hey, all this scaling out and dynamic scaling is happening in seconds and minutes, but you network guys are like way too slow and way too complicated, right? And it is true actually I got offended 2 years ago when I heard that, because I've been involved with OSS, and like 10 years ago we were doing like bandwidth on demand and all that stuff, right? But it was kind of a wake-up call. We also co-founded a forum, an industry forum called Cloud Ethernet Forum. It's a spin-off from Metro Ethernet. So I remember very well in the inaugural meeting, right, that we had. This is about 8 months ago. There were a bunch of data center guys there, and a bunch of carrier type people there. And we would talk about this debate about this mismatch in terms of agility and the time to provision. And it was, I finally understood, right? There was a raise of hand. People were asking, it takes seconds and minutes to move VMs around. How long does it take to, provision or add additional bandwidth to your inter-data center link so that you can handle the additional workload? And then the carriers where we did a poll, and the average time to provision bandwidth and provision additional links between the data center, for example, is guess how long? Your guess. Hours? Days? 3 days, right? So, and a lot of that is not even technology issues. A lot of that is operational type issues. A lot of that, and operational issues all relate to mindset, right? So the good news is, the whole industry on the, us networking guys, right, is finally kind of taking this kind of problems head on in a different approach. And, from everywhere, from ops to architecture, I mean operational, right? Because when you talk to the carrier, there are architecture people there and the ops people, right? And the two really need to work together in order to do things such as, truly dynamic on-demand services. So we're finding active conversation between all these communities, on the network side, to look at finally how we can support the agility, right, in the VM layer. So, we see like the firewalls and the layer 47 people, like the DPIs and the firewalls. The obvious play there is to, they're already software running on appliances, so just put it into VMs. And now, so your firewalls are now virtual firewalls and they're VMs and they can scale out and they can kind of follow the workload, for example, right? And you can support multi-tenancy and support different security policies for your different tenants. So that's great. So, we're seeing a lot of talk about NFV, virtualizing network functions, and, and it's just as flexible as VMs. And then the interesting is kind of the layer down, right? So we call, how many of you talk a lot about overlay and underlay networks? Okay, thank you. So I love that term, right? Because actually, before we started having that conversation, the community started talking about overlay and underlay. Before that, it was even worse, right? It was just network virtualizations, and then people were like, "What the heck?" We've been talking about VLAN for 10 years. So, but basically, what it is the interesting dynamic where people like VMware, right, are basically saying that, hey, we just from the hypervisor, we can just encapsulate our VM workload, into an IP packet, MAC and IP, and we can just point it anywhere, and we can forget about all this network complexity, right? Just give us a reliable IP transport, right? So that's one dynamic. The other dynamic is, the networking folks, right, that make the switches and routers and so on. It's like, hey, wait a minute, we are much more than a dumb IP transport. There are actually a lot more we can do if the underlay network actually work in orchestration with the upper layers, right? So what we're seeing, as a testing company, where we actually help all these different players, right, in the ecosystem to kind of validate the technologies and, more importantly, validate how the end-to-end solution work together, is that that a lot of the focus now is no longer testing individual protocols just for the sake of testing protocols, right? OpenFlow or VXLAN and all that stuff. That's cool, and we need to do that. But what we're seeing a lot, right, is really that we need to offer an end-to-end solution. This whole concept of service chaining is a good example, right? So, this is, there are many different variations on how you could do it, but the whole idea is, using underlay or overlay or both, you can kind of create this virtual topology and you can insert and remove, different services, right, as part of your topology, and you can control how your network functions support your work, your IT workload scale and all that stuff. And if you look at a service chain, and it is really a end-to-end service, right? And if you look at the technology layers underneath, we're dealing with underlays like MPLS, could be between data center. Within the data center, could be IP, it could be pure IP, it could be BGP all the way to the top rack switch, or it could be VXLAN, right? A lot of talk about VXLAN and VGLE, and then up layer we're now talking about vSAN and all that stuff, right?
There's one thing that you touted on the top
right.
two, which is VXLAN and NVGRE, which have their advantages and limitations, and we don't often see much about STT. Now, it's more targeted at the hypervisor to hypervisor traffic.
Right.
But does that get left out because it's not really a target for you folks in what you're doing today, or do you see that that's something you may touch on later on?
It is not left out intentionally. It is left out just in the scope of, like I said, there are, when we go into a customer, there's a conversation. When we talk to the specific vendors, right, we tend to get into the specific protocols.
Right.
But when we talk to the enterprises, when we talk to the data centers, it is, the protocols is one thing, and a lot of them are not even decided yet, right, they're testing. and they want us to think about how we can help them validate the solution end to end, right? And end to end, a lot of time, not just between the layers, but also like from an end user, kind of this application level quality of experience measurement, right? So I'll get into that, but that's a very good question. So on one hand, our effort is supporting all the latest protocols, and we've done that for years, right? Spirent is known for doing all the protocol soups, right? Testing and doing high scale and reliability and conformance and all that stuff. But now with the virtualization, we started actually talking more to the end user organizations, and we're finding this end-to-end methodology is actually, much more important. Yeah, does that make sense? I mean, you guys seeing the same thing? Are you, like, when you engage your customers, right, and your user base, do you find yourself talking more like solutions end to end, or is it very deep dive protocol specific?
The protocol is it's kind of a given. You don't really discuss it more than raw requirements. Obviously, NVGRE has very specific limitations, and that's why VXLAN obviously is a top one in it itself. It's also got its own limitations. But yeah, so it's mostly that's already chosen. It's not a discussion point. It's just more how do we work within. This is the protocol that's already live.
And yeah, we're seeing the same thing, and actually we enjoy that very much, right? Because a lot of times when we go into meetings and we kind of get deep down into all these protocols, and we kind of feel like that it's hard to have actually a strategic and a valuable solution level discussion with the customer. But now with all this SDN, NFV and all that stuff, it's actually more and more we're finding ourselves into, hey, customer, what are you trying to do? What services are you trying to offer? And how are you trying to differentiate, right? And kind of lift us above the kind of the protocol soup level. So, so talk about challenges. And I would say, if you ask me, and you can tell me whether you agree or not, is the number one issues in terms of all this everything virtualization in different layers. I think the number one problem that we're seeing out there is one word: predictability, right? And there are all these different layers involved. It's very, very complex codependencies, right, between the IT layers, the VXLAN and the underlay. So there's a lot of like complexity involved in terms of how one layer would impact the other, right? That's one part of it. The other part of it is, when you're shipping a firewall, an appliance, what you're running on is totally under your control. But now if your firewall and load balancers is running as a VM, so now you have to worry about, what is the guest OS I'm running on, and what is the hypervisor, and what NIC driver is it using, and what server is it using, and what are my, what are the other VMs that are running in the hypervisor. So it's basically kind of a very unpredictable thing. And what we're seeing is even for example, the classical firewall thing is, the customer adding one weird ACL, one weird firewall rule, right, and kind of bringing the firewall, to an halt, right? And think about that's a classical problem on a hardware firewall. Think about how much worse that is, right, on a virtual firewall. And we're also seeing stupid things like just choosing the wrong BIOS settings, right, have unpredictable result. So what on top of that, now we're talking about all these things dynamically scaling out, and also customer being able to go to a self-service portal, right, and configure this stuff on the fly. So, as all this stuff are changing, what we're finding is, well, first of all, most of the cloud service providers, right, there's not a lot of talk about SLA, right? I mean, even if you go to some of the main providers, when you go to the SLA, service level agreement page, it's mostly about uptime and availability, right? Very little about any kind of quality of experience, that kind of thing, right? So when we talk to a lot of the other carriers and data center operators, the new services, especially when we go into hybrid cloud, where we're now, people are now targeting enterprise. So the SLA topic is kind of an elephant in the room, right? It's something that has to be done. So I think that is a challenge, but yet it's an opportunity for us, we feel. The other one is this finger pointing thing, right? Do you consider, so if I say networking people versus server people, right? Like, how would you classify yourself?
Both.
Both? Okay, well, that's nice. That's kind of the exception. When I talk to customers, right, typically there's the, people that handle the WAN, and then we talk to a group and they say, hey, we're meeting the data center group, cool. And what we find out is that, it's actually the data center networking group, right? And they don't deal with the servers. And when we talk to the server guys and go, hey, how about your firewalls and stuff like that? They go, oh, we actually don't know. Sometimes so it's kind of like this cultural issues, right? And we talk about ops, right? Ops, operations is actually very important, and ops is actually where a lot of this, gaps are in terms of culture. And I was actually a network administrator for one of the largest national bank in Canada, actually. And I would say probably I'm a Canadian, by the way.
Nice. There we
Thank
go.
you.
That's right.
Yeah, so I worked for the Blue Bank.
Okay.
And I was at one point responsible for the network. I was the network support. And I spent many hours, late night, right, lying on the trading floor, rows of analyzers. And all that time was spent proving to the apps guys that it's not the network, right? That's basically the part of my job, right?
Tom knows that one.
And I think now with all this like vertical, all this cross-layer stuff, it's the same thing, right? But now the people that are offering the quote-unquote cloud services, you have to bridge the culture, right? And SLA is not, it's not cool if you just doing SLA on the network level, right? Or it has to be end to end. So so it's an interesting challenge, but I think also it's about time, right? The industry faced this heads on. I mean, the story I tell about, it's not us thing, that was like 15 years ago, and now we're still struggling about the same thing, right? So the way that we see it is, and kind of the new role that we see Spirent, right, as a testing company in this new world is, I kind of sum it up to lab, live, and ops, right? So Spirent is very famous or well known for doing technology validation, right? So we have all this like high density, 1040, 100 gig, we can do 1500 port of 10 gig, testing the fabric, big irons and all that stuff. So we're very good at, validating technologies in the lab. But now with all these challenges that we are talking about, we are seeing that there's actually a need and to not just validate technologies in the lab, but also help with this live stuff, meaning that when someone deploy, right, or when a customer deploy a virtual private cloud, right, how does the provider communicate to the end user that this is the kind of performance that you can expect, out of this cool little private cloud that you just provisioned? And how do you proactively monitor, that for any SLA kind of degradation? So we think that a lot of this stuff Angus talked about, we have everything that we do in our hardware runs exactly the same as VMs, right? So that enable us to live deploy our technologies in live services to enable this kind of benchmarking and SLA monitoring for live services. And and literally a month ago, this chart, it was just lab and live. We call it lab to live. And I added ops, right? So just this couple weeks, Vero, by the way, is our senior product manager for our virtualization. He's my partner in crime. So Vero and I went out on a customer tour, and we sat in the room. And typically when we sit down with carrier customers, right, we're dealing with the people that are worrying about how to define the deployment architecture and all that stuff. And normally, when a carrier worry about how to kind of deploy, what they call first office applications, right, basically the first deployment of a given architecture, right? There are always ops people in the room, meaning that they always worry about how the field techs and how the NOC people are getting support, right? Those new services. So it was really interesting. I really didn't have any story for the ops people. But then when we talk about all this virtual stuff, it turned out that, hey, all this stuff is actually while we're talking about testing and validating and monitoring live services, those things are perfectly useful for people that are worrying about how to troubleshoot in case there's a problem, right? So now we basically said, hey, all these challenges that we talk about are actually creating new opportunities for us going for lab and live and ops. Does that make sense? So this is kind of our high-level architecture. So I want to say architecture so that you can read too much into it. So in the bottom, oops, we have the big iron boxes, right? And I said we are very good at doing all the protocol soups. I just have the latest buzzword in there, like VXLAN, NVGRE, and OpenFlow. And I would say we are the best. Like for example, VXLAN, we are like helping people like push all the way like 2,000 VTABs and and hundreds and thousands of VMs behind each VTAB. So we can do like massive scale testing with all this overlay and delay network stuff. And then Angus talked about that DPDK and the Yocto thing, right? So when you look at our chassis, you can think of it as a mini data center, right? With very, very high speed interfaces and with a very dense number of x86 cores inside. And the software, all this like protocol goodness, protocol soup stuff that we are running inside, they're actually running as VMs, right? So the cool thing is, and we've been doing that for years, by the way. So with this new world, all we're doing is we take all those VMs and we package it, and we can now run it on any hypervisors. Or you can run it on bare metal also, right? So we now have all our functions. Now you can run it, you can insert our software as a VM on KVM or VMware or anything.
So right? Is your plan then you basically, and maybe you're going to get into this later, I apologize we're jumping in early, but you would put a VM or this instance at every ingress and egress, and so you could actually measure the entire flow across the whole.
Yeah, and the cool thing is, and thank you, that's actually my next layer up, is so by the way, you guys are one of the first ones seeing this. We haven't even named our product yet. I just have a temporary name called the Spirent Test Orchestration Framework. Right, it's a mouthful, but maybe you can help us come up with a cool name. But basically, the idea is, because it's VM or containers, and we can insert it anywhere, right? Based on what you need, based on whether you're troubleshooting or whether you're testing, so based on whatever the test methodology could be. So we have this orchestration framework, which basically has the ability to provision our VMs, and you can place it anywhere, right? And depending on the use case, sometimes that's all the customer need, right? But we also have the capability to provision, when we basically, it's kind of like, Jim invented that word, the guy in the blue shirt there. We call it, when the testing guys, we always say device under test, right? We're testing a device, it's called DUT. So now we have a new term called CUT, cloud under test. So basically this orchestration framework, what it can do is, let's say if you are testing a specific topology and a specific firewall, you can actually give us a OpenStack compatible image, like an OVA file of whatever firewall you're testing. And let's say if you're running a Link, LINC, or OpenFlow vSwitch. So what we can actually do is we can instantiate a virtual topology with whatever DUTs that you're using. And we can actually let you define the cloud, meaning the topology, the connections between these DUTs. So now you can actually create this virtual instance of a network architecture that you're testing. And then what we do is we also allow you to provision our virtual test ports, right, around this topology, right? And that's basically our orchestration. And then once the virtual test ports are in place, then you can run whatever test methodologies, right, against it.
You touched on obviously some of the heavy hitters on on-premises stuff. I'm assuming that you guys can extend out into other hypervisors. If we were to run vCloud, of course, we could just fire it out into vCloud hybrid service. So if we had a stretched, layer 2 that was spanning out into the VCHS environment, could we do it out there? Also, do you touch on AWS and other, sort of cloud hypervisors?
Okay.
Right. So I'll take that one.
Okay.
Yeah. So we are.
Oh, we have no mic on you.
Grab the handheld. It's up next to a slide.
Okay. So by the way, Vero is our product manager handling the virtual stuff. Great question, though.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Viral Vimawala. I'm the product manager for virtualization solutions, and I am a partner in crime with Paul To. And as in how we're looking into this SDN and NFV space, Paul did mention that we went on a tour, and the good part is we work with the vendors, like all the NEMs and all the cool stuff on the SDN and NFV vendors. We also work with the carriers and the enterprises, so we get a view of both the parties and what they're looking for. And if I may also take this opportunity to address your STT question. So mainly what we've seen is pretty much VXLAN has been the driving force from the vendor side, but now as in how the customers are trying to deploy, there are open questions, and people have started considering STT also. And as in how we see some traction, so it's a matter of prioritizing which one to prioritize first. We went in with VXLAN, and VGRE is always there, and then STT is one of the strong contenders in there, and we're definitely considering to put in STT in there.
Right.
That's one. Second thing is, as a part of our virtual solution, we are also looking at on-premise and off-premise, cloud-to-cloud testing, cloud-to-on-premise testing.
Right.
And I think Angus did mention that we are already working off at the Amazon cloud with our Avalanche product. We're looking to port in our Spirent Test Center product. So we are trying to do a complete L2 through L7 on cloud and off cloud.
Right.
And we are multi-hypervisor shop, so you can run our virtual products on VMware, KVMs, and Hyper-V,
right.
what may be.
And also the other thing I want to point out is, we are trying to be as agnostic or as compatible as possible with what the community is doing. So not only at the hypervisor level, but also at the orchestration level, right? So the stuff that we're doing, we're trying to make it, or we're trying to reuse as much as possible stuff that are out there. Like for example, OpenStack, right? There are all this Neutron plugin, there's the ML2 module that already do a lot of this, tunneling stuff. Then there's different like OpenControl, the OpenFlow plugin, and so on and so forth, right? So in a lot of sense, we are taking advantage of a lot of those kind of like mediation layer in terms of working with different technologies, via Neutron plugins, and also there's parallel things going on in the VMware side also, right? And,
Yes,
and same thing on Amazon, right?
On the VCHS is obvious. I think it's an easy one because it's not necessarily you would never necessarily see that it's in the cloud. You just see it as a stretch layer 2 network into a second data center. It just happens that the second data center is in the cloud, or at other premises. Really, is what it is. It's,
Yeah.
But say like if you're running in rack space and you're running both the private and like you're running a hybrid cloud and rack space, should technically be the same thing, right? Because it's the location. Locality means nothing to you. The path is all encapsulated layer 2. So you just see that data center 1, data center 2, and you can measure the topology in between and within them.
Exactly. So our CTO actually have a favorite thing that he says, we can test over, or we can test. So in this case, right, there's the network in the middle, right? But what are we testing? Are we testing for end-to-end? Right? Are we and a lot of methodologies is testing about, like, for example, how my VM moves, right? How fast can my cloud resolve, MAC address moves, and how can we test against duplicate MAC and VLAN traffic leaking between different tenants. Those are kind of tests over, right? And it doesn't kind of matter, whether it's VXLAN or MVGRD or what flavor of VXLAN that the vendor, because everybody have a way to kind of reduce on the multicast issue about the MAC learning and all that stuff, right? So a lot of our methodologies are actually test over, where we are really testing for kind of the end result of what kind of network behavior we're looking for in order to support, things such as VM moves and so on, right? And then when we work with the vendor, we have then, VXLAN, specific tests for VXLAN and MVGR and so on. So how are we doing on time?
You are about 1 hour in.
1 hour in. Okay, so I'll quickly because we review VMs, right? You guys are right. So basically, what it means is we get to test the whole stack, right? Which hypervisor you're using, whatever, drivers and you're using DBDK or whatever, acceleration technologies you're using. Our solution ended up being very useful, right? For you to verify doing point verification for all those components that would affect the performance chain. Another one is, we talk about the service chain concept, and And this thing we really want to stretch is that, we talk about a lot about east-west and north-south, right? And what we're seeing a lot, virtualization, obviously east-west is oftentimes virtual to virtual traffic, like VM to VM traffic, right? And north-souths are always, a lot of times, in the case of testing, right? Oftentimes we may have a single 10 gig or 40 gig port on the south side, and using our Avalanche product, we can literally simulate a whole city of users, right? Hitting the servers, right? So what we're finding a lot of times with the new world kind of east-west, north-south virtualization is very, very useful. The fact that we can have a single test methodology or a single library of test methodologies, and it doesn't really matter whether the traffic is between virtual, physical, and you can actually change the mix, and you can dial the east-west, north-south mix dynamically and see how the underneath layer behave. That's extremely useful. And the fact that the code that we're running in our hardware is exactly the same code that are running in the VM is really, really useful for that. And as Angus said, we are the only one who has that underlying capability. The other one is migration, right? We are real VMs, so we're not simulating, right? So that's very important if you actually want to test the underlying move mechanisms of moving VMs and storage. So the cool thing about this being a real VMs, so let's say if your favorite storage, we actually have bundled storage I/O tests within the VMs. So for example, in this case, we are from the VM, we are running layer 2 to 7 traffic between our virtual port and our physical test chassis down there. So we're simulating massive, layer 2 to 7 traffic, between, kind of this north-south, right? And then we, at the same time, we run a storage workload, right? In this case, it's, basically using I/O meter, right? And we're basically doing all this I/O read write. And then you use whatever move mechanisms, right, to move. And then we can measure the convergence time, basically, right?
So as you're testing, how much of what we want to test goes into it, or do you have sort of like predefined test kits that move all the way up through the network stack? Like, obviously you touch on layer 2 to layer 7, where we have made specifics that we want to do, pushing up to layer 4 to 7 more necessarily than layer 2, 3.
Yeah. So thank you so much for pointing that out, because I missed a very important thing. Is you can customize your own tests and do everything from raw, right, down to our raw basic test what I call atomic test functions. But we actually have offering a library of composite test functions, right? So these are pre-integrated functions. Like we have a data center pack, when we have a solution pack. We're developing a solution pack for the EPC, the virtual EPC. So different, basically pre-canned methodologies, basically a bunch of fancy scripts, right? And basically they're reusable, they're composable. So the idea is, if you don't have to go down, you don't have to build everything from scratch. You can just drag and drop from different different recipes, basically, right? And be able to compose your test case very quickly. I almost forgot that. Thank you for. Okay, so next one. This is my favorite slide because let's say it's a vSwitch or a cloud of vSwitch in the middle. Right, and oftentimes when people are deploying virtual firewalls, or in this case, virtual tap, right? So there are lots of concern about when you are copying traffic, mirroring traffic, right? You're basically using the CPU or using your hypervisor resource to do mirroring traffic. So that has to be very, disruptive to the performance, right? Or the underlying live traffic that's going on. So there's lots of concern about proving in terms of the virtual tap vendors to prove that their virtual tap doesn't impact on live traffic. So in this case, we do a very simple test, and it's very standard of what we do. So on the left side, we have a virtual port of our Avalanche product, right? Basically running as a VM. And on that port, we're simulating hundreds and thousands of web users, right? And then on the right-hand side, we have another virtual port. In that case, simulating tens of New York Times web server. And what we're doing is we are simulating hundreds and thousands of sessions where we're just doing a web page load. And in real time, we're doing repeatedly, and we're measuring how long it takes to load the web page, right? So that's our very simple, the most simple quality of experience metric, right? We can get actually way more complicated than that. You can do like multimedia, mix of traffic and all that stuff. But this is like just most basic level of QoE measurement. And while we're doing that real time, what we do then is we start going in and turning on the features, right? Turning on your DPI features and your virtual tap features. And then we show kind of at which point it actually start impacting on the live traffic and on the live QoE, right? So it's really, really simple test for us, and it's very, very useful. And because we can do virtual and physical in the same methodology and it's the same, what they allow us to do is, let's say, in this case, it's a virtual IDS, but let's say if it's a physical IDS, or if you have a mix of servers, or you have some, if you want to also test how your fabric works, which include a hypervisor-based network as well as a physical network, we can do all that because it doesn't really matter. It's the same methodology. It doesn't matter whether the traffic points are physical or virtual. And the other cool thing is on the very same port, you don't even have to provision a new port. On the very same port, we can simulate attacks, right? Because the Avalanche product is for testing firewalls and stuff like that. So we can simulate a DDoS attacks, right? So in this case, we actually we can show you how the VTAP works and how fast is the virtual IDS, responding, and so on. So that's why it's one of my favorite use case slide. Any questions? Okay.
So that's on the Avalanche, and that's in today's. Is that part of the test center suite? And you apologize.
Okay.
I don't know 100% on all the suite, and obviously you talked about the new name for this feature.
Right. So we have two. We have the Avalanche product, right, and that is more application and security testing.
Right.
We call AppSec. And then the STC product, that's where we do a lot of the layer 2.7, protocols, VXLAN, OpenFlow, and all that stuff.
Okay.
But because they work under the same orchestration framework, so in a lot of the methodologies, we will spawn, a mix of STC virtual ports and a mix of Avalanche virtual ports, and then we can orchestrate whatever test methodology between these ports, right? So it's fairly integrated. It's not like you have to do two different tests, right? You can mix them together. And then kind of going back to the virtual is this, right? So this is like going into kind of the live. Remember we talked about how do we go beyond just lab testing, but getting into how we enable live and also troubleshooting like ops, right? So this is the ability, tying into orchestration. It's all about orchestration, right? And if we have the ability to orchestrate, that means that we have the ability to place those virtual ports in very strategic places, right? Depending whether you are benchmarking a new virtual private cloud or whether you need to troubleshoot, right? So if you're benchmarking and so the typical thing is when you provision a virtual private cloud, right, you have all these endpoints. So what we would do is we will provision the virtual ports and we will run a suite of benchmarking services. So we'll come back and tell you this is what you can expect in terms of layer 2.7 throughput. This is how we are ranking your virtual firewall or your virtual firewall layer performance. We actually have simplified down to A, B, C, D, and E kind of grade, right? So we kind of give you a benchmark report, right? So that's fine for the initial turning up of the service. So now what we can do though is we can leave some of the VMs there and we can run, like remember we talked about the QoE measurement, right? You can simulate quality of experience, such as how long it takes to load a web page. It could be like, we can even look at like multimedia, like a MOS score kind of thing for voice quality. We can do all kinds of quality of experience measurement. So what we can do is we can leave some of the VMs there and we can actually measure kind of a low level of active traffic to measure kind of what's the QoE, kind of an ongoing measurement, right? And often that is kind of early warning, right? If something is wrong. So let's say my MOS score between this point and this point is 4.8, and all of a sudden we're starting a degradation or we see a sudden drop to 3, then it tells the ops guys there that there might be a problem, right? And hopefully before the customer call, right? And now the ops guy can go in there, and because we have the ability to orchestrate the VM ports, so what we could do is, we can run a mesh test, right? And then identify, like for example, if you're looking for which part of the network is slow or slower than normal, we can just run this mesh test, And then you can look at the topology and you're like, oh, okay, this part is slower than normal. So you can home in there, right? Or you can, place your the agent, right? So let's say I can do an end-to-end test like this, but I can peel the onions. I can now place my agent here and here and here to try to isolate the problem, right? Within the hypervisor, between the hypervisor, across the VXLAN, across the data center, that kind of thing.
Are you finding that a lot of this is going to be really popular in the sort of service provider space? Because obviously they have significantly dynamic networks versus a lot of the customer spaces, we may not be as dynamic. I mean, this is amazing. Like, I love the idea of being able to do, CI style testing live and keep it going, at the network layers. But again, with the dynamic capability, it really seems very large enterprise or SP oriented.
So we are finding, because a lot of this like cloud services and hybrid, a lot of the architecture are under test and under development, right? So what we're finding ourselves is, in industry forums, we're having conversation both with end user organizations like big banks and so on, but at the same time, we're actually trying to get everybody together in a room, right? At the same time, like we recently did an enterprise roundtable in Hong Kong as part of an MEF meeting. And at the same time, we have enterprise people in the room, we have carriers in the room, and we're trying to create this awareness and conversation on how did this stuff need to work if we are talking about going beyond just availability and uptime in terms of SLA for the cloud services, right? I mean, it's kind of interesting, right? Some of the carriers even say, we guarantee capacity but not performance, right? That's kind of the state of where it is now. So we need to kind of get above that. So that's actually a very interesting conversation. And we're trying to have this together between the enterprise, and the providers, right? And actually maybe you guys too. we need to get you guys into some of that conversation. Okay. So DevOps, how many of you interested in DevOps, DevOps? Okay, continuous integration. Oh, okay, so I'll just quickly go over. So the idea of this new stuff called GitHub and Jenkins, does that mean anything? So the idea is I have a team of developers, everybody working on the same software, but we're all working on different part of. So we can all check in code to like a GitHub server, and the GitHub server will basically generate a new build, right? Kind of with all the new stuff, and then it will talk to the Jenkins server, which is a regression test server, which automate a lot of the software tests. But there's a gap there, and we call it the last mile of DevOps automation, right? The last mile is for all those people that are developing OpenStack and SDN and L3 applications, right? You have to test the network, right? So what they have to do right now is you basically take everything in a USB stick, you walk into the network lab, right? You load it up, and then you run the test, and you come back. So we were doing that ourselves, right, a year ago, and we had less than one test cycle per day, right? So what we did, because now we talk about the ability, using OpenStack and orchestration to create the DUTs and then the cloud and then the tests with the cloud, and actually all that stuff live on a single hypervisor, right? So now what we did was we basically pipeline this. So basically we tie our orchestration into, say, a Jenkins server, so that when you need to test software, we would basically create a virtual instance of the network, whatever topology that you need to do. We actually run the test, and completely no human intervention, and then we feed the result back to Jenkins, so it's completely automated. So there's no human being needed anymore to go into the lab, and So now internally at Spirent, we're doing 38 test cycles per day, versus less than one before. And that translates direct, it's actually very easy metrics, right? If you look at all the engineering, software engineering metrics, number of critical defects, how many test cycles you can do, features, velocity, all that stuff is boom. Everybody that are doing this seeing sudden, ramp up on, improvement in terms of software team, software engineering efficiency. This is kind of a little bit different. It's like development, but it's another area where we're seeing virtualization of test, actually having some interesting impact. So again, I talk about lab, live, and ops. So I don't think we get into that, but we see this as three big area of opportunities in terms of new roles of test and assurance for us. And enterprise, I think they were actually, I don't know who sent us some pre-question, and that was really actually helpful. So, this is like, we are known as the big God box, cost millions of dollars. Actually don't cost millions of dollars, but they could be expensive for a normal enterprise. So, but we actually have all this other stuff that I don't know, most people don't know about, right? So basically, you actually don't need to even buy anything in order to use some of this stuff that I'm talking about, right? So we have a cloud-based service called Blitz, right? And you can actually, and it's actually our stuff running in the Amazon EC2 cloud, and we're running in different geographic locations all over the world. And let's say if you have a web application that you're really concerned about having too many users hitting you at the same time and bringing down your service, such as Obamacare is a good example, right? So you can actually go to our website, maybe if the White House is listening, right? You can go to our website, you can say, hey, I want to simulate, 10 users hitting my, my website, or 200,000 or a million users from all these different locations hitting my website. And we have pre-canned kind of application profiles. So let's say a Facebook like traffic or YouTube like traffic, or we can customize it. We can do this, what I call capture replay plus, meaning that if it's Obamacare, we can actually capture the traffic, but we actually can use that to replicate to many stateful sessions.
They could have used you.
Right? Yeah.
They
White House, are you listening? Give us a call. So that's cloud. You don't even have to buy anything, right? And then for people who want to do it on premise, you can, we have the virtual stuff, everything I talk about. So actually, we have some customers that don't have any hardware ports, right? They're just buying our virtual ports, and they're running those as VMs. And then we also have appliances, right? This one is actually quite interesting. I think some of you have seen this. It's the product called Exxon. Oh, no, actually, this is about Bliss. So that's what I was talking about is, and it's like a pay-per-use. You can buy a bunch of credits. You can buy monthly subscription. So it's very easy to buy and purchase. This other one is Exxon. Exxon is an appliance, right? And you don't need a Spirent expert to run it. It's literally an iPad interface. You just go in and like that, right? And we have a lot of, it's Spirent inside, but we kind of like take some of the most commonly used methodologies, and we put it behind a touch interface, right? So those are things that that we are not just for lab testing, right? We're enabling the enterprises. We're enabling different skill set to be able to do this kind of things. And we talk about involvement with standard bodies. So I have the honor that I just have been appointed as the vice chair of the new Testing Leadership Council at ONF. Right, so we're working very actively with Open Networking Foundation. And a lot of this stuff is not just OpenFlow, right? But also how OpenFlow works with NFV, how OpenFlow works, Open Daylight, all the cross-layer stuff. And also working with test labs around the world, right, to really look at how we can help the industry as a whole to really go in and validate this kind of technologies and speed up adoption. We also very involved with the ETSI, the ETSI NFV group. How many of you have heard about that? So the NFV, is a bunch of carriers got together and have a bunch of use case definitions on, how do you do like virtual firewalls and load balancers and service chain and stuff like that. So we have been involved with that since day one, and recently we presented a paper there in terms of, and we co-work with Intel, right, on a white paper also in terms of testing methodologies for all this virtual stuff. And then the Cloud Ethernet Forum is quite interesting. So I also have the pleasure with working with a bunch of great people there. And so it's a spin-off from Metro Ethernet Forum. How many of you have heard of Metro Ethernet Forum? Okay. So Metro Ethernet Forum, it was very successful defining a network-to-network interface, right? So it's basically, if I'm buying Metro Ethernet, right, let's say between New York and San Francisco, right? And but if I need to go into a country and deal with another operators, let's say in Asia, right? How do I have an end-to-end Metro Ethernet service, and how do I define, the SLA, right? And ensure how do the carriers work together to ensure the end-to-end compatibility, SLA, and things like that. And that became very successful, right? Because it actually enables people to deploy this stuff and deploy multiple carriers to work together, So now with Cloud Ethernet Forum, we're working on a similar thing, but it's not about connecting carriers together to offer an end-to-end service. This is now more about bridging that gap that I talked about, right? It's kind of the server people versus the network people. So we kind of threw up all this software-defined X, right? Everything. This is happening in every single layer, right? Software-defined storage, software-defined, network, everything. And every layer has its own multi-tenancy kind of technology. Every layer has its own controllers and APIs. And every layers have its own offering in terms of SLA capability. So what the Cloud Ethernet Forum, what we're working and pushing is, how do we work with the individual technology layers, and also how do we correlate the dependencies, right, of the SLA attributes between the layers to a point that we can offer confidently an end-to-end SLA, and more importantly, we can offer, or we can kind of help the people that are responsible more at the kind of the server layer and up, and the people that are responsible for the network layer and down, right? How do we communicate? Both in terms of enabling SLA, but also in terms of when there's a problem, right? How do we isolate problems and so on? So we're working on that, and I think this is going to be really, really interesting. Finally, like I said, getting the server people to talk to the network people. And this is one example, right, of correlating SLAs, right? Because, when people complain that it is slow, that was my bank experience with the Blue Bank, that's the biggest word, right? It's like, when it's slow, you just say it's slow, but, you have all this stuff that we have to figure out. So this is kind of an example on how we can correlate all the different SLA attributes that contribute to that, quote unquote, is slow, right? So I'm almost done. So finally, we focus on cross layers and end-to-end solution. Anywhere, any endpoints, right? The ability to insert our agents, our test ports, anywhere in a hypervisor-based network or in a physical network. And it doesn't matter to us. And you can do that for troubleshooting, you can do that for SLA or for benchmarking. And orchestration is really, really the key behind that. And as I said, we are working on a solution that will work with stuff that people are already using, such as VMware, OpenStack, or whatever that the end user is using. And going back to the one library, that's a key thing for us, right? Because we have, if you talk about solutions, we have everything from network, SDN, OpenFlow, VXLAN, we have firewall, application, we have security, we can do security fuzzing. And we can do Wi-Fi, virtual evolved packet core, mobile LTE. We have things that we can actually simulate a whole bunch of wireless APs and a whole bunch of wireless. So we have all this stuff, right? And basically what we're doing is and each area have its sets of test methodologies. So what we're doing is we're building and consolidating all these methodologies into a single library, so that, let's say if you're AT&T or if you're provider X, and you need to offer a service, and your service end-to-end actually would crosses, say, a mobile handset going over a mobile VPN, into your data center, that goes through an OpenFlow traffic engineering path into a VX. So you have and you need to kind of worry about how do you test and how do you validate and offer SLA on the end-to-end chain. So what the ideal thing for us is that you just have to have some guy that sit down. It will be an interface that similar to Eclipse, where you just sit down and you have a bunch of kind of like Visio, right? You have a library of different test methodologies, and you just drag and drop and define your test workflow, right? And then just go click. So you don't even have to know every single technologies, right? Just basically compose all this stuff together. So that's our vision, and we are, in a lot of way, we are kind of a lot of this stuff are already deployed because it's like existing technologies, but we're kind of gluing this stuff together in the new kind of everything programmable, everything orchestrated world. And we're really taking advantage of this new trend to kind of get all our stuff together to to offer new values to the market.